units of the Syrian army continue their national task of eliminating terrorist hideouts. And large-scale popular rejection of Morsi's role in the mob of the American Zionist plotters against Syria. Amidst massive protests, the G8 summit is held in Ireland, with Syria at the top of the agenda. Good afternoon, this is news in English from the Syrian Arab Television in Damascus. Head of the International Red Cross in the Middle East, Robert Mardini, said that the Red Cross representatives have access to almost all Syrian areas, adding that the Red Cross received no information about any use of chemical weapons in Syria. A military source said that a unit of the Syrian armed forces confronted a terrorist group that tried to attack a military point in dalla and inflicted heavy losses among the terrorists. A number of heavy machine guns were also destroyed. The dead terrorists included Sabah Jalala, leader of the gang that calls itself the Battalion of the Golan Front. The source pointed out that several mines, some of them Israeli-made, were defused. These mines weigh 30 kilograms each, and they were planted in the vicinity of Jalin Square in order to be detonated remotely. A Syrian military unit today chased a terrorist group to the south of the site of Sayyida Zainab towards al-Baladiyah in Damascus countryside. The clash led to the death of several terrorists and the wounding of others. The security source pointed out that those who escaped were being chased towards al-Baladiyah. A unit of the Syrian Arab Army repelled terrorists who tried to attack a military checkpoint at the roundabout of al-Nashwa al-Gharbiyah in al-Hasaka, killing most of them and injuring the rest. Heavy casualties were inflicted among the terrorists, while their weapons, including heavy machine guns and automatic rifles, were destroyed. Syrian Arab Army repelled attempts by armed terrorist groups to attack the neighborhood of Jurat al-Shayyah near the city center mall in Homs, killing many of them. Syrian Arab Army units fought armed terrorist groups that were trying to infiltrate through tunnels from al-Wa'ar neighborhood into al-Ghouta farms to enter Homs city, killing many terrorists. Syrian Arab Army soldiers also targeted terrorist gatherings in Qisin of al-Hula and in the neighborhoods of al-Khalidiyah and al-Qarabis, inflicting heavy casualties among them. And in a related context in Homs countryside, Syrian Arab Army continued to chase the terrorists in all areas in that governorate, killing 5 of them and arresting 2 others in an ambush near Hesye. The terrorists were trying to smuggle more than 15,000 liters of diesel in 2 trucks into Qara and Al-Brej. In Palmyra, units of the Syrian Special Forces killed 2 terrorists who were trying to plant explosive devices in one neighborhood of the city. The electric power station in the north of Homs feeds the countryside in the north-western part of the governorate and some quarters inside Homs, including Al-Wa'ar. The station was targeted by terrorists who caused great damage, costing millions of Syrian pounds, and burned the operation room in the station. This caused several areas to plunge into darkness. A few days ago, the workshops in the whole electric sector in Homs began to reform and rebuild the station in order to make it operational as soon as possible. The Iranian newly elected President Hassan Rouhani held his first press conference in Tehran today to say that the wide participation in the Iranian presidential elections is an evidence of Iranian democracy. Rouhani said that the elections are a victory for the people, stressing that he won't forget his campaign promises and will focus on national causes. Answering a question about Syria, the Iranian president-elect said, that the Syrian people are the only ones responsible for their future, and that he opposes terrorism in Syria and any interference from any country in Syria's internal affairs, stressing that Iran stands with all the countries in the world to restore stability to Syria. As for sanctions on Iran, Rouhani said these sanctions are not in the interest of Western powers and that the only party benefiting from these sanctions is the Zionist entity. In response to Morsi's joining the US-led mob plotting and instigating against Syria and his irresponsible attitude of cutting off relations with Syria according to the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood organization, the Egyptian people announced their rejection of Morsi's acts, which expose his role in carrying out American plots against Syria. The leader of the constitutional party in Egypt, Mr. Mohammed al-Baradi, asserted that Morsi's declaration do not represent Egypt and Morsi should resign in order to restore the correct constitutional course. An Egyptian military source asserted that the capacities and potentials of the Egyptian army would be only used to preserve Egypt's national security and would never be utilized in any foreign war against a brotherly country. The Israeli press expressed happiness to Morsi's decision to cut off relations with Syria. Ma'arif described it as a strong blow to the Syrian government. The Russian President Vladimir Putin asserted that Moscow was exerting every effort to prevent the fragmentation of the Syrian state. In a joint press conference with the British Prime Minister David Cameron, yesterday Putin pointed out that both countries agreed on the necessity of reaching a political solution in Syria as soon as possible. He replied to Cameron asserting that Moscow was sending weapons to the legitimate Syrian government according to national norms and conventions. Then he asked Cameron whether Britain wanted to arm terrorist gangs that cut dead bodies to pieces, while Britain calls for humanitarian principles that build the European civilization. In Belfast, capital of Northern Ireland, today the summit of the G8 starts amidst strict security precautions and lasts for 2 days. On top of the agenda is the crisis in Syria. This issue will also be discussed between the Russian and American presidents Vladimir Putin and Barack Obama. Meanwhile, there are attempts to escalate attitudes to hinder the political efforts as the leaders of the G8 states arrived to Ireland. Protests against their policies erupted in demonstrations in both London and Belfast. The demonstrators called for achievement of social and economic justice and the preservation of environment. Movement opposed to globalization intended to organize massive protests in various parts of Ireland against the policies of these states, which bring poverty to the whole world in favor of a very limited class of rich, are getting richer every day. The Irish and British police impose strict security measures in many areas. The Mayor of London, Mr. Boris Johnson, warned the British Prime Minister David Cameron against the dangers of arming the fighters of the opposition in Syria. He wrote in the Daily Telegraph that nobody would win this war in Syria, and that Britain should not use Syria as a field to flex British muscles because the weapons given to the opposition could end up in the hands of al-Qaeda. These warnings are accompanied with many voices opposed to the intention of the British Prime Minister to join the American President Barack Obama in the process of supplying the Syrian opposition with weapons. Former Deputy Director of the Committee of Combating Terrorism in the White House, Mr. Edward Beck, asserted that the American involvement in the crisis in Syria does not represent the most popular option inside the US. An opinion survey organized by the Gallup Center last May showed that most Americans oppose intervention in Syria. The Americans clearly supported keeping the American army away from Syria. Beck told the Iranian Press TV website that arming the opposition would not be a smart step because American involvement would help nobody. The US has recently announced very clearly that it was involved in supporting the terrorism in Syria and affirmed its intention to give the terrorists more weapons. The American website of World Socialist asserted that the announcement of the American armament of the militias in Syria showed Washington's further slipping into the crimes and crises committed by Obama's administration. A stand of solidarity with Syria was organized by Syrian citizens in Italy, in cooperation with the Syrian-Italian Committee and the European Front in support of Syria. The participants expressed support for Syria against the terrorist gangs and their regional and international supporters. The Syrian citizens asserted that Syria would remain a steadfast citadel against the imperialist Zionist forces targeting our region. As Turkish security forces continue to attack demonstrators in the streets leading to Taksim Square in Istanbul to prevent them from entering it, leader of the Justice and Development government Recep Tayyip Erdogan attacked media outlets accusing them of spreading what he called lies. Erdogan, who gathered up his supporters at another Istanbul square, said that if international media wanted to show that facts in Turkey, then they should show the crowds in this square. Erdogan tried to downgrade the number of protesters and to maximize the number of his supporters. He blamed the protesters for erecting tents in Taksim, saying that those people were terrorists. That was it for our news for today. More details on our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. The latest in finance and stocks in our economic news after the break.
Good afternoon. The Union of the Syrian Industrial Chambers called the Minister of Industry to support the national industries through establishing industrial areas specialized in small and medium industries, as they should provide facilities including centers for training and rehabilitating, in addition to extending the establishment of industrial cities in the governorates to provide enough job opportunities by inviting the real estate developing companies, while the government's role is to monitor the work mechanisms in these industrial cities. The manager of the sugar establishment stressed that the sugar beet will be exported this season, starting from the beginning of next month, showing that the expected amounts of production are 320,000 tons of sugar beet this season, allocated in Hama and Al-Raqqa, as these amounts will be manufactured in Tel Selhab company, pointing out that there are committees assigned to receive and market these crops, whereas the aim behind this productive plan is to cultivate more than 25,000 hectares to produce about 1,300,000 tons, while the cultivated areas reach 7,300 hectares because of the crisis that Syria is going through. The Minister of Water Resources said that the water conveyance project from the Orontes River to the east of Salamiyah city has almost been completed. The minister pointed out that the project also includes establishing 8 water desalination stations, which in turn provides more than 250,000 people with water. On the other hand, the minister asserted that the storage dams in Syria has exceeded 18 billion cubic meters of water, while the actual storage reached about 16 billion cubic meters. The American crude oil traded near the highest price in more than 4 months, while futures were little changed after rising the most in 5 days on June the 14th, capping a second weekly gain. European stocks advanced after the Stoxx Europe 600 index posted its longest streak of weekly losses in 14 months, as investors awaited signals from the Federal Reserve on stimulus measures. The US index future shares also rose. On the other hand, Japanese shares were up, with the Topix index rebounding from 4 weeks of losses amid lower volume ahead of tomorrow's Federal Reserve policy meeting. The Jewelers Assembly set the price of the 21-carat gold at 6,900 Syrian pounds per gram, and the 18-carat gold was set at 5,914 Syrian pounds per gram. The Rashadi golden coin was set at 50,100 Syrian pounds, and the English coin was set at 56,000 Syrian pounds. The dollar gained versus the euro and the yen before the Federal Reserve starts a 2-day policy meeting tomorrow, as investors weigh whether the central bank will curb bond purchases. The yen fell at least 0.3% versus all of its 16 major peers, damping demand for haven assets. With this we conclude our news. Thank you for watching and goodbye.